Welcome, guys, to the Dynamic Duo Show. I'm Frenz.
I'm Kevin, and welcome to the new Batcave and Avengers Tower, everyone.
I love the new catchphrase, Kevin. Kevin, I am so excited today because, and I know how excited you are, because we have our first guest. And it couldn't be a greater or better guest because we're both huge fans, as you know, of Mr. Ron Frenz, one of the titans comic artists in the industry. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. But believe me, you could have done better in the comics industry than Ron.
Well, actually, you joke, but you know, I was talking to Kevin about this, and Kevin, I hope you don't mind me sharing this.
Go ahead.
But you know, he was so excited he could barely sleep, just as I've been excited for the past few days. You know, you and I have spoken in the past. And I just, you know, I guess my first question is, do you get the weight of it? Do you get the weight of your influence and how you impacted people through your art?
I do, in that people have responded to me at times the way I would have responded to the guys I grew up on.
Yeah.
What I have found, but from being on Facebook, which I just joined like 3 years ago, you know, I'm way behind the curve. Technically, you and I had spoken about that.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, through Facebook, what I've discovered is that this job gives you a chance to be part of people's personal nostalgia. Okay, it's not about you. It's about you were present. Your work was present when they bought that book and took that bike ride to that 7-Eleven and picked up that book along with an iced tea, and then were heading for their grandmother's, and they had a great meal at their grandmother's after reading the book under a tree. Whatever it was.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderfully pleasant memory that I get to be a part of. And, you know, people have asked me half jokingly, well, gee, Ron, how do you become a legend? And I can't speak for everybody, but in my case, I showed up for work. You know,
Interesting.
When I was assigned a book, I stayed on it and enjoyed it and loved it. And, you know, DeFalco and the only time we did short terms is when circumstances forced us to do short terms, you know?
Yeah.
But it really is a matter of, in my case, of, you know, you show up. You show up every month. You become a regular participant in somebody's enjoyment of Thor. But it's about Thor. It's about Spider-Man. It's about, you know, we're sharing the experience together, which is an incredible privilege. And I'm very proud of that aspect of it. But, you know, when it comes to objectively, you know, who are the legends in this industry and who are the journeymen, I am firmly in the journeyman category, and I'm proud to be there. That's all I ever wanted as a child, you know, wanting to break into this business and be there, like, you know, and meet some of these guys. And fortunately, I also got in early enough that some of my idols were still active and still contributing. I got to meet John Romita and speak with John Romita and know that John Romita was aware of my work and work with him a few times. You know, I got to meet John Buscema in the offices, in Tom DeFalco's office at one point briefly, but it was wonderful. I met Steve Ditko briefly in Archie Goodwin's office.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've had enough experiences that I can, you know, just drop some names. And I got to work with Joe Sinnott for years on Thor, and I got to work with Sal Buscema and call Sal Buscema a friend and a colleague.
My God.
Things that you know, 7-year-old Ron dreamed about. You know, that's what I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to be one of those guys and contribute, and I got a chance to do that. So, you know, when they finally throw dirt on me, there'll be a smile on my face. Believe me, you know, how many people get to literally live the dream, you know, and I did. I'm a very, very lucky guy.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Mr. Frenz, if I may, to piggyback on what Franz was saying during the intro, I just want to take a moment to thank you on a personal basis. I am disabled. I have cerebral palsy, and I must tell you that in my earlier days and younger years, your work helped me get up through some of the darkest times in my life. So please do not sell yourself short, as Franz put it, for you being a legend and being out there for people.
Well, I'm very humbled to hear that. I'm so glad that it gave you some relief in the course of your life. I mean, and that's really all we're trying to do, is to entertain and to give you 15 minutes away from everything else, you know. And that's what it always was for me as well. And that means the world to me. Thank you very much. And I never want to in any way do a disservice to how, you know, humbled I am and happy I am that I had the experience, and that because I was a fan for years. When I was a kid, that's all I wanted. I loved the comics. They affected me deeply. You know, I've spent some time in therapy, and my therapists have been surprised how certain characters and comics have influenced me almost as much as my parents did, you know, that kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
you know, I was very much that kid. And so to get a chance to contribute and to pay that forward and pay it back to other fans and everything is an incredible privilege. And, you know, thank you for saying that. And you're very, very welcome, because the experience has been wonderful for me as well, you know.
Well, I get it now. I really get it now, because basically what you're saying is that you really truly lived the dream. You're basically us who got a chance to be you, which is the ultimate thing. In other words, you're a fan who got a chance to participate in what you're a fan of and to contribute to it.
I was I was very single-minded about it. I mean, when I was a kid, if you asked 6 or 7-year-old Ron Frenz what he wanted to do, it was grow up, work for Marvel Comics, and draw Spider-Man.
Wow.
And to accomplish that, I took anytime an opportunity was presented to me. My last 2 years of high school, junior and senior year of high school, I went to a Votech and took a commercial art course. Through that, I won a half scholarship to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, where my instructor at the Votech made it clear to me that, okay, you want to get into comics. I understand that you have a goal, but you know, if you can't do that specifically, you need to introduce yourself to other forms of art and other forms of commercial art, just in case, as a backup. You owe it to yourself to be as well-rounded an illustrator as possible. So when I went to the Art Institute, that's what I did. I spent 2 years trying to not make any of my assignments look like comic book artwork. You know, I learned how to handle a pencil in different ways. I learned how to do fashion illustration and things like that. And it was a wonderful experience for me, because I never lost my goal of working in comics. I didn't discover any other form of commercial art that I liked better. So I always had that singular goal. And after art school, fairly shortly after art school, Jim Shooter is also a Pittsburgh native, which is where I am from and still live. And he was doing a shop appearance in Pittsburgh. So myself and a few of my friends who were also art students went down there with our portfolios. And, you know, I came very close to chickening out. My friends were very supportive. And so I showed him the samples, and he spent time with everybody that had samples. But it ended with him saying, you know, Xerox these and send me a package, and I'll put it in front of editors. And he kind of offhandedly said, so I guess you and I will probably be in touch about a job. And I walked out of there going like, wow, cool, you know, that kind of thing. Now what ended up happening was I sent off the package. It went into a drawer, I guess, of people will hire someday, maybe. And it was like a calendar year, before I actually heard from Marvel. In the meantime, I got a job at a local animation house that did local and regional commercial spots, animation on commercial spots. So I did that for a year, and took the job with the understanding that when Marvel finally called, I wouldn't just leave him in the lurch. So for my first few years at Marvel, I I stuck around at the animation studio. I was working at the animation studio during the day and going home and doing, let's see, well, up through being hired on Spider-Man. So, you know, I worked on Kesar, I worked on Star Wars, Marvel Team Up, a couple of King Conan, and some Indiana Jones jobs. You know, all of that was done while I was doing day work at the animation studio. But he was also very understanding. If we weren't really busy at the studio, he let me work on the Marvel stuff while I was at my desk at the studio too. So, you know, it a couple of times when we were really busy at the animation studio, you could feel the edges crinkle a little bit. You know, it started to get to me a little bit. But it wasn't until they offered me Spider-Man that I sat down with him and said, you know, it's not going to get any more secure as a freelancer than you know, I've established myself, obviously, because they want to hand me this title, and I'm not sure I'm ready, but I'm not going to give them a chance to change their minds. So that's when I went into comics full time, was when I started Spider-Man. Yeah.
Kevin, if you don't mind, I have two quick questions. What was it like for you to get that call a year later, and what was it like for you to be given Spider-Man? You know, as the artist for Spider-Man.
The call was thrilling. What it was actually, I was still living at home at the time. So my mom called me at the animation studio and said, somebody named Al Milgrom called from Marvel Comics.
Oh, you're kidding.
And left a number for you to call back. So I called Al Milgrom back. I don't know if it was the same day or the next day, but I called Al Milgrom back. And
knowing who he is, of course.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Captain Marvel and West Coast Avengers, the whole bit. Yeah. You know,
of course.
Al Milgrom. I absolutely knew who he was and was very excited and intimidated. And he handed the phone to Louise Jones, then, now Louise Simonson.
Wow.
The editor on Kesar.
Absolutely.
And she was calling to offer me some fill-in work if I was interested. You know, I've always felt that the sample pages I had done were about a character that was created by a fellow art student of mine called the Pariah. And his origin involved mercenaries in a South American jungle. So there were a lot of big leaves and stuff, right? So they were looking for somebody to do a Kesar fill-in, and they went, hey, well, this guy can draw big leaves and trees. Maybe we can get him. And so, yeah, I did two fill-in issues of Kesar, and I did the King Conan for Louise. A lot of the stuff I did my first couple of years was out of Louise's office. She was also the editor on Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Kesar and King Conan at that time. So they were all out of the same office, but it was a wonderful experience. I mean, you know, you do kind of get thrown in on the deep end, and you learn while you're swimming. Louise is a fantastic editor and very motherly in a way, but if you asked her for feedback, she gave you really good feedback, you know, and I did have to ask, because after the first issue, I was halfway through the second issue, and I said, am I doing okay? And she said, we wouldn't still be hiring you if you weren't doing okay. Yeah, you're doing great. You know, is there anything specific you want to know about? And I asked her a couple of more specific questions. But it was great, you know. But you were really learning on the fly, and then the second part of your question, when they offered me Spider-Man, I had just said to my friends, my group of friends here in Pittsburgh, I had just said at some point relatively recent to that event that if they offered me Spider-Man, I'd probably say no, because I didn't feel I was ready yet.
Really?
But when they offered it to me, I wasn't expecting it. I absolutely wasn't expecting it. I mean, even after doing Team Up, because it kind of went the way it's supposed to. Spider-Man guest starring Kesar. Tom DeFalco, who was the Spider-Man editor, saw Spider-Man's appearance in Kesar and went, oh, he didn't screw up Spider-Man too bad, and gave me some Marvel Team Ups. And briefly, although it's kind of hard to tell the way the books were published, I was the regular penciler on Marvel Team Up for a brief time. And so that's how it became, I did like a fill-in on Spectacular Spider-Man. It featured J. Jonah Jameson for DeFalco. And then he was going to give me The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, but he was handing the editorial reins over to Danny Fingeroth. And he said it's actually going to be Danny's final decision as to what he's going to do with giving you either the kid or wrapping up the Thunderball story, that kind of thing. And Danny ended up giving it to me. But yeah, and the initial offer was like 6 issues because John Romita Jr. had been on the book for a while and was doing a great job.
Big shoes to follow.
And they hired him to do X-Men.
That's
so
right.
he was going to go away for 6 months on Spider-Man and get X-Men on schedule. And then he was, if you can imagine, he was going to do Spider-Man and X-Men, pencil them both. And, that was the plan. So I was coming on for 6 issues and, again, made the decision that, well, if they're trusting me with Spider-Man, then the work has been coming regular. I'm going to take the jump and go freelance. And I did. And we were in the midst of the issues where, I got paired with DeFalco. DeFalco went from being the editor to being the writer, which was Danny's doing. Tom was not planning on that. And at some point during our early run, John Romita Jr., as Danny Fingeroth tells it, JR came into the office and was looking through the pages. And Danny said, "You're still coming back, right? That's the deal. That's what we're going to do." And he goes, "Well, you sound like you're really happy with these two." And he said, "Yeah, I think they're gelling. I think they're doing nice work, but we'll stick to the plan." And JR said, "No, let him have it. I'm busy enough on X-Men." And so the first time I met JR at a convention, I thanked him for my Spider-Man run because it wouldn't have happened if he wouldn't have just not give us the nod, that kind of thing. So.
Mr. Frenz, within your history of Spider-Man, is there a storyline or something artistically that you've always wanted to do and still haven't gotten an opportunity to do it yet?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I was thrilled, but also a little disappointed that because DeFalco wanted to create new characters, and we did, and we were lucky enough to create some characters that sparked, that other writers wanted to work with and stuff. And we got to create Silver Sable and Puma and Black Fox, and it's because he wanted to create new characters. So there were a few classic characters, classic villains that I didn't get to do. Now I've gotten to do a lot of them over the years in one-off jobs, like I never got to do the Lizard, but I got to do an issue of Untold Tales of Spider-Man that featured him. I've since gotten to do a backup story with Mr. and Mrs. Spider-Man that ran in one of the anthologies, and we did a Lizard story in that because I love the Lizard so much. We did an annual when Tom said, "What villain would you like to do?" Craven, because that was one we didn't get around to yet. So I got to do Craven, inked by John Romita Sr., which was, really
wow.
And I didn't, during our original run, I didn't get to do Dr. Octopus, but I've since gotten to do him, in a one-off job. So, if you hang around long enough, you can check off some of the boxes, that kind of thing. So, but I unfortunately, the way we left the title was not our choosing. We were relieved of our duties on the title for various and sundry reasons that seem to vary depending on who you're talking to. But I'm sure we would have easily done 7 years on Spider-Man or more if we would have been permitted to. And so, yes, there's still a lot of stories we would have loved to have told. We love those characters. Well, it's just one of those reasons that I'm pretty sure that Spider-Girl clicked with readers is because Tom and I had a real familiarity and a real love of that world and those characters. So I think it felt a little more organic than some legacy stories, you know, because we loved Pete, we loved Mary Jane, we, you know, loved that world, and it all came from that fondness, you know, that we wanted Mayday to be equal parts Pete and Mary Jane, and created. We came up with the idea that, you know, she was trapped, she was stuck between two cliques. You know, she has friends that were nerds and friends that were jocks because she was very well rounded, but she was polarized because of her friend groups, and that only when she discovers her legacy, when she discovers Spider-Girl, she can use her physicality and her mentality with, you know, in equal parts, and it frees her up, and it's an incredible release for her to be able to just not have to deny any half of her, you know. And so all of that came out of just doing the one story. You know, we wanted to create characters that showed that dichotomy. We wanted to create characters that had legs, just because that's the way we do things. So when we got to the end of that issue, to say that we wouldn't do, you know, that we weren't dying to do a sequel would have been a lie. I mean, we did get to the end of that issue and go, boy, it would be fun to play in this world some more. Yeah. So when Bob Harris gave us the opportunity, it was great. You know, it was a wonderful opportunity. The only reason that I didn't do Spider-Girl from the get-go is because, one, Pat Olive had made a name for himself on Untold Tales of Spider-Man and knew that world very, very well. And two, and probably most compelling, was we were going to do Avengers Next, and Kevin Masterson as the legacy Thunderstrike was going to be. We decided he was going to be a member of that team, and once we decided that, I had to go do that.
Wow,
I had to be part of the next generation of Thunderstrike, and I knew Spider-Girl would be in fantastic hands with Pat. You know, that kind of thing.
It's fascinating listening to you talk, because you raised so many questions, and I'm trying to keep track of.
Well, feel free to interrupt. If you don't interrupt, I'll talk for hours. So.
I want to ask you about how you ended with, and you know, we'll bounce back and forth, how your run ended on Spider-Man. That's an interesting, controversial type of story. Kudos on Spider-Girl, because what you talked about came off the pages. You could tell that whoever was making, when you were on that book, there was love there. There was a familiarity there. There was a connection there, and it came off the pages, and the fans got that. Certainly, one of the questions that I would like to ask you is the process that you talked about earlier. You said you worked with Simmonson's, you worked right out of her office. One of the things that I loved about your art is that you made Spider-Man strong and capable and powerful. How does that come into play? Is this your decision? How is the interaction between you as the artist and the editor and the writer to deliver the page? We all know the Marvel way, but how was that personally for you?
Well, what Tom and I discovered, and the reason we've continued to work together 30 years later, is because we have similar ideas of what a good comic is, you know, and we like each other and respect each other and respect each other's input. On Spider-Man and on most things we do, we would have ridiculously long conversations, as probably fans do, you know, of who these characters are, and you know, especially when you're getting familiar with your partner and with the character, you have these long conversations about who these characters are and how they would react in given situations, and interestingly enough, stories will suggest themselves from there. You know, I mean, we would often have a lot of conversations about Pete, a lot of conversations about Pete and Mary Jane and how they felt about each other, and you know, that would suggest storylines and B plots and, you know, and C plots and you know, villains that would work to bring out, you know, something in Pete that we wanted to discuss or spotlight. So, you know, it really is the process itself is really hard to pin down, because ideally you should let the characters to some degree dictate where they're going to go. So it means you have to understand the characters. And one of the things that was interesting to me, DeFalco wrote a book for a British publisher called, I forget what it was called, Creators On, and it was creators on Spider-Man, and he interviewed everybody from Stan Lee to, I believe at the time it was J. Michael Straczynski was the current writer at that point. So that was the span you were talking about. And what was interesting to me is the difference in how I was trained and the difference in how Stan Lee and Len Wein and Marv Wolfman and Jerry Conway, they talked about finding Peter's voice. They talked about reading the back issues and finding out, what Stan had done and discovering who Peter is through his voice. And then the later writers,
indeed,
up through Straczynski, would talk about their Peter Parker.
Yes.
Who their Peter Parker was and what I'm trying to say with my Peter Parker. And so it's just a completely, it's apples and oranges. And I am not here to judge which is the most valid or, which is the most, because the editors and the company own the character. So whatever direction they find appropriate, that's what's appropriate, But
listen, I'll judge. Okay, I'll do some judging.
It was a very different approach to writing, company-owned material, and if you know what you're looking for, it shows. That's why you can occasionally see things where you're going like, why would they do that?
Yes.
I don't think Pete would do that. But the bottom line is, guess what? Pete did it. It's one of those things that keeps people from enjoying the movies. Is there, fans tend to, as soon as they hear there's going to be a Spider-Man movie, they have in their head exactly what they want it to be.
Yeah.
And if it's not exactly that, then it's a failure. Then it sucked. And that's never the case. Come on. You have to be willing to, I probably have a bit of an advantage because I know what discussion must have gone on behind the scenes. The whole thing with Peter's relationship with Tony Stark. That in the Marvel films, that doesn't bother me at all. It just doesn't. One, because Uncle Ben had been done two different ways. He had been done right the first time, and the second time, not so much. So everybody knew about Uncle Ben. And two, they needed to introduce Spider-Man into a fully formed universe. So he needed a touchstone. And Tony Stark was the obvious choice, especially given what had gone on in Civil War, and in the comic version of Civil War, where his relationship with Tony became a centerpiece of that. I didn't decide that he and Tony would have that kind of relationship, but that decision was made by the creatives in the comic books. So for everybody to just, be that negative about their relationship in the movies doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I think Uncle Ben is very present in those movies. And when I tell people why I think that, they go, well, you're doing too much work for the movie. I said, no, I'm not doing it for the movie. There is a line in there when Pete is talking to Ned in his bedroom, and Ned says, does May know? And he says, no, I can't do that to her after everything she's been through. Uncle Ben died relatively recently. That's there, So, there are other indications, the initials on suitcases and things like that. But, Kevin Feige knows we all know about Uncle Ben, and we've already seen Uncle Ben in the movies. So maybe we still will, Tom Holland would love to see the original Spider-Man play. And why is his name escaping me right now? The actor that played Spidey in the
Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire. Tom Holland has said, I would love for Tobey Maguire in flashbacks to play Uncle Ben, that kind of thing. And, given that Aunt May is now Marissa Tomei, why not,
Sure.
I'm an old school guy. They've yet to make the Spider-Man movie that I would make if somebody gave me $200 million and said, go make it.
Again, you said
They haven't made it yet. And I'll tell you the main thing that blows my mind that hasn't been in a Spider-Man movie yet. Stan Lee gave that character the perfect reason to have a costume because he went on TV. Whether it's the Ed Sullivan Show or whether it's America's Got Talent or Star Search or whatever permutation over whatever time you're making the movie, that's why Pete made the costume. That's why he created the Spider-Man persona, was to be on television, and they haven't done that in the movies yet.
That's right.
They always dance around why anybody would put on tights, and Stan handed it to them on a silver platter. It blows my mind. Nobody's used it. You know?
I've got quite a lot to say. I want Kevin to ask a question, but I've got quite a lot to say based on what you've just said. Okay. And if I may, I'll disagree with you at some points. But Kevin, go ahead.
My primary question is this, based on what you just said. How do you feel about the organic webs versus the mechanical pieces that Pete develops?
I was never, I wouldn't have changed it because I think it's an important part of Pete's character that he is a scientist, you know, that's one of the reasons that he feels separated from his classmates and everything is that he has this talent. So I wouldn't have gotten rid of it. But I also understand what they were thinking at the time, thinking that it would separate the audience from relating to Pete because you're talking about a high school kid that can create this web fluid and blah, blah, blah. And they found other ways around it since. So, but the organic webbing as an issue doesn't negate whether or not you've captured Spider-Man. And I thought Raimi in the first movie, boom, he got it. And the moment that I knew he got it was when the thief runs past Pete and Pete had just, you know, had that argument with the guy from the wrestling who stiffed him on the money, and the guy runs past Pete. And the guy says, well, you could have taken that guy apart. And he goes, I missed the part where that's my problem. And the audience applauds and laughs at Pete finding his tough guy and standing up to the guy. And I sat in the audience and went, Raimi did it. The whole audience is on Pete's side right now. And I know what's going to happen next, but not everybody does. And when it does, they're going to come tumbling down just like Pete. And I said, that is the core. That's the seed of the Spider-Man character. And he pulled it off. So everything else is gravy, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't think the organic webbing negated anything as far as who Pete was. Right? I mean, they still dealt quite a bit with him being a science student and knowing Dr. Octavius and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I don't let the little things bug me too much. Having said that, Kevin, I will tell you that I was so thrilled when I saw the eyepieces in the Tom Holland Spider-Man. I was like a 6-year-old going, they got the eyes right. They got the eyes right. They finally got the eyes right. And I still, when I see pictures of him in that mask with those eyepieces, I go, wow, cool.
Well, let me say this, if I may. On the very last point that you made, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, we talked about it in the last show. The organic versus mechanical webbing, I would have preferred mechanical, but it wasn't a big deal to me because it's an invisible difference. Once he's swinging through the air, it doesn't matter if it's mechanical or organic. Here's where I'll disagree with you. And here's where I'll be a judge where you decided not to be. I think there is a difference when and I think it's a visible difference that has had an impact on the industry as well as on the character. When the creators, instead of, you know, interpreting and giving you the voice of the character, give you their voice. I think what's happened, and tell me if you agree or disagree, feel free to, but I think what's happened in the industry is that since that shift took place, where creators were basically giving you their Spider-Man or their Thor or their Fantastic Four, the characters have been diluted to a large extent. And each creator comes with his or her new version of the character, therefore diluting the character even more and creating a greater disconnection to the audience. So I may love Straczynski's Spider-Man, but I may not love the other person's Spider-Man, and vice versa. Whereas when DeFalco or Stan Lee were writing Spider-Man, we were all on board. This was the character that we knew and we loved.
Yeah.
And I think that what's hurt the industry, and the industry is in trouble to a large extent, what's hurt the industry now is because Marvel has gotten to the place where DC used to be pre-crisis. There's so many different versions of the characters. You don't know who to love. Can't really identify Spider-Man anymore. And for me, that dilutes and reduces the character. Here's where I will disagree with you. With respect to the relationship between the Tom Holland Spider-Man and the original version of the character, in terms of the way he perceives Stark and Stark becomes the father figure, that would be acceptable. That would be fine to me, except that's not the character. That's not who Peter Parker was. He was never that, oh my God, Mr. Stark or Captain America. In the last show that we did, we talked about this, and I showed samples of what Spider-Man was like when he first met the Avengers, and what Spider-Man was like when he first met Captain America. And he was this, or Fantastic Four, and he was a brash, arrogant, almost arrogant type of guy. He wasn't the puppy little, wide-eyed newbie kid that he has become. Now, I do agree with you that was taken from the comic books, but the comic books were just as wrong to me when they portrayed in Civil War Spider-Man looking up to and being the noob and all that other stuff. And so that's my position on it. I don't know how you feel about what
well, no, I agree with 98% of what you said. And as far as opinions on the Tom Holland Peter Parker, you'll have as many opinions as you are people that are going to be stating them. But what doesn't bother me about it is that, one, I like Tom Holland as Pete quite a bit. They are backing him up to only having been Spider-Man for a few months when he meets Tony Stark, which is different from how Spider-Man met the rest of the Marvel Universe. He was more established and everything. But I know exactly what you're talking about as far as his arrogance, which you could say was defensiveness, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But even when he first encountered the Fantastic Four early on, he was putting on a show. He was out of defensiveness. He was putting on a show. So I don't,
sure.
I agree with your assessment of those facts. But somebody who really hated Homecoming, somebody online who really hated Homecoming, said that what they should have done, what should have happened in that movie is that, if you're going to have Tony Stark hand him the keys to the kingdom initially, that's fine. But what should have happened in that movie is that at some point, that costume and the stuff that Tony Stark gave him should have failed him, and he should have had to make it on his own with just his web shooters and his own costume, and he should have had to prove that it was Peter Parker who's Spider-Man and that he's not Iron Man Jr. And I sat and I read that and I went, that is the movie. That's what's in the movie. He gets the costume taken away from him, but he still insists on going after the Vulture in his sweats with his web shooters, and decides that whether he's got the suit or not, he's going to be Spider-Man, and he wins. That is what's in the movie. And you're not seeing that because you already decided you were going to hate the movie. And that's the only argument I have against fans and their preconceptions, is that I think they're cheating themselves out of some enjoyment.
This looks like a job for Superman.
Hey, look! It's Spider-Man!
The dynamic duo return next week. Don't listen.